Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari. Yasodanandana Brada Janaranjana. Yasodanandana Brada Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari. Yasodanandana Brada Janaranjana. Yasodanandana Brada Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari. Yasodanandana Brada Janaranjana. Yasodanandana Brada Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Brahmadakacharya Asadhara Sadushi Shiman. His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swaraj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Haribo, Slava Zabrani Bhaktam, Slava Shigarui Shigarangi, Namo Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhute, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane, Namaste Saraswatam Deve, Gauravani Bicharane, Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskadyade Siddharne. Om Agyanatvarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagradatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Vrijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakans Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabando Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanshena Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prishubhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapa Truvyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pranitananda Shadwaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, questions by the sages, and we're still reading from text number 2. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears a message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. So the next paragraph. You read over and above this yesterday, I think. The proper method of receiving the transcendental message is to hear it submissively. A challenging attitude cannot help one realize this transcendental message. One particular word is used herein for proper guidance. This word is shushushu. One must be anxious to hear this transcendental message. The desire to sincerely hear is the first qualification. Less fortunate persons are not at all interested in hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. The process is simple, but the application is difficult. Unfortunate people find enough time to hear idle social and political conversations. But when invited to attend a meeting of devotees to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, they suddenly become reluctant. Sometimes professional readers of the Bhagavatam immediately plunge into the confidential topics of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, which they seemingly interpret as sex literature. Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be heard from the beginning. Those who are fit to assimilate this work are mentioned in this sloka. One becomes qualified to hear Srimad Bhagavatam after many pious deeds. The intelligent person with thoughtful discrimination can be assured by the great sage Vyasadeva that he can realize the Supreme Personality directly by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Without understanding the different stages of realization set forth in the Vedas, one can be lifted immediately to the position of Paramahamsa simply by agreeing to receive this message. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vicharane Nirvishesha Shinivadi Paskatyade. It doesn't seem to be very steady. Here words are used like, if one hears the message of the Bhagavatam, then Krishna becomes established within his heart. So there's a difference between hearing and listening. Here it implies that hearing means to listen. And listening, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, that it's not just listening, like sitting in a class and listening for the most part. In the beginning of the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Maya asakta manakparta yogam yunjan manashaya asamshayam samagramam yata gyasasi tatshinu. Now hear from me, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind fixed on me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. Now it's difficult enough to sit and listen. Now what to speak of trying to apply what we've listened to. First of all, it has to be clear what we just heard in order to apply it. And how much can we actually capture? That if I asked, what was the first words I said in this lecture, how many could repeat those words? Or what was the verse I just quoted from the Bhagavad Gita? That takes very special qualifications. One Indian man was listening to two British people quarreling, and they got into a fight over some issue. It appeared in court, and the only witness was this Indian man who was listening. They called him as a witness to say what had happened, and he quoted word by word exactly what the two British men had said. But the even more amazing thing was that he didn't speak English. So that's called memory. Now, most of us understand some language that the Bhagavatam is written in, but Maya asakta, to put the mind on Krishna, Maya asakta manakparata yogam, it requires devotional service, connecting, yogam yunjan mayashaya. Devotional service in such a way as that one factually takes shelter of Krishna at every moment. Ainanda tanuja kinkaram patitamam vishame bhavam buddho kripaya tavapada pankaja stita dali sadrisham vichintaya. That, my dear Lord, you may, Ainanda, O son of Maharaj Nanda, I am your eternal servant, but somehow or another I've fallen into this ocean of birth and death. Kindly pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. That has full humility, full surrender, full consciousness of Krishna, full desire to become a servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. Maya sakta manakpar yogam yunja manash asamshayam. And at that time there's no more doubts. No more doubts means that we realize who we actually are. If I told you you were a blade of grass in the spiritual world, would you believe me? If I told you you were the personal assistant of Srimati Radharani, would it be easier to believe? In any case, there'd be some doubt even if I said something or someone else said something, because unless we realize who we are, what our spirit, who we are, unless we at least realize we're eternal, then there's some doubt whether I'm actually eternal or not. Sometimes people say, I'm not afraid of death. But if you take a gun to the head and say, well, all right, no problem, right? Then suddenly they say, wait a second, I'm too young to die. Well, you're 93 years old. Still, I'm too young. So if actually, unless we're on the transcendental platform of experience, then there's no question of being fearless, and fearlessness comes from not having any doubts about our spiritual identity. What to speak of what particular relationship we have with Krishna eternally. Even when we realize what we're not, namely that we're not this body, still we may not be able to understand who we actually are, what our eternal relation with Krishna is. Therefore, samshayam samagramam, completely without any doubt, touch Chinu and hear from me. Maya saktamana parata yogam yunjan manashaya asamshayam samagramam yata gasasi touch Chinu. Hear from me, because we're trying to learn how to hear. In the Bhagavatam it says that one can hear with rapt attention if one's mind and intelligence are completely controlled. And one can, unless we're purified in our habits of eating, sleeping, work, and recreation, etc., then our minds and senses won't be controlled. Therefore, hearing depends upon a number of factors. To hear with rapt attention, I think this is the third chapter of this book. The last verse. So it says here in the chapter 3 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, text 44. One can certainly see directly the presence of Lord Shri Krishna in the pages of the Bhagavatam if one has heard it from a self-realized soul like Shukadeva Goswami. One cannot, however, learn Bhagavatam from a bogus hired reciter whose aim of life is to earn some money out of such recitation and employ the earnings in sex indulgence. No one can learn Srimad Bhagavatam who is associated with persons engaged in sex life. That is the secret of learning Bhagavatam. Nor can one learn Bhagavatam from one who interprets the text by his mundane scholarship. One has to learn Bhagavatam from the representative of Shukadeva Goswami and no one else. If one at all wants to see Lord Shri Krishna in the pages, that is the process, and there is no alternative. Sutta Goswami is a bona fide representative of Shukadeva Goswami because he wants to present the message which he received from the great learned Brahmana, Shukadeva Goswami. Shukadeva Goswami presented Bhagavatam as he heard it from his great father. And so also Sutta Goswami is presenting Bhagavatam as he had heard it from Shukadeva Goswami. Simple hearing is not all. One must realize the text with proper attention. The word nivishta means that Sutta Goswami drank the juice of Bhagavatam through his ears. That is the real process of receiving Bhagavatam. One should hear with rapt attention from the real person. Then he can at once realize the presence of Krishna in every page. The secret of knowing Bhagavatam is mentioned here. No one can give rapt attention who is not pure in mind. No one can be pure in mind who is not pure in action. No one can be pure in action who is not pure in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating. But somehow or another, if one hears with rapt attention from the right person at the very beginning, one can assuredly see Lord Krishna in person in the pages of the Bhagavatam. Therefore, we can take a purport, as I sometimes quote, from the Bhagavad Gita 4:34, where it says, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadechanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshanaha. Try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. And in the purport, Prabhupada mentions that the process of devotional service is undoubtedly difficult. And therefore, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master in the line of disciple succession from the Lord himself. That no one could be a bona fide spiritual master without following the principles of disciple succession. The Lord is the original spiritual master, and a person in the disciple succession can convey the message of the Lord as it is to his disciple. No one can be spiritually realized by manufacturing his own process, as is the fashion of foolish pretenders. The persons we want to hear from, the devotees we want to hear from, are those who are actually repeating the message that they heard in disciple succession. And if they're asked, what is the basis of your authority, then one at once can quote the authority that one is referring, the spiritual authority that one is referring to. Not that I heard from so-and-so, and if you ask, well, what did he say? Where did he get the information from? So, well, I don't know. I have no idea. Well, why don't you ask him? Well, anyhow, okay, but I heard from so-and-so, etc. It's just like that story of Garfunkel. Garfunkel was an ass, and he died. And the washerman was very attached to his ass. And so he shaved his head. Because in India, one of the symptoms, or one of the ways you pay respect to someone who died in your family, is you shave your head. At least the men do. So he shaved his head. Now, the local tax collector came by asking for some taxes, and he noticed that this particular washerman's head was shaved. So he asked him, why did you shave? He said, you don't know? Garfunkel died. Really? Okay. So then the tax collector thought this was a very important person, so he shaved his head too. Then the policeman came by and saw the tax collector had shaved his head, and he asked, why did you shave your head? He said, you haven't heard? Garfunkel has died. Oh, I didn't know that. So then he shaved his head. Similarly, in the course of time, the police chief, the mayor, the governor, they all shaved their heads because of Garfunkel's death. Now it came up to the emperor, and his minister had shaved his head because of Garfunkel's death. So the king asked the minister, why did you shave your head? And he said, because Garfunkel has died. So the emperor said, who's Garfunkel? So the minister went down and inquired from the different people who had shaven heads, and finally they discovered Garfunkel was an ass. Therefore, tasmat shastram pramanam te karya karya vivastito gyatva shastra vidanokta karma kartami harasi. One should know what is duty and what is not duty by the directions of Shastra. And knowing such duty, one should act so that one can gradually become purified. Therefore, as it says here, the bona fide spiritual master is a transparent media to Krishna. He doesn't say anything that Krishna doesn't say. Now, when he's preaching, he may sometimes say things contemporary about contemporary problems or contemporary issues, and it may be appropriate for the audience, but it may not be appropriate for everyone, because no one in this material world has the same opinion about everything that goes on within the material world. Everyone has their idea of what's politically correct, what they expect to hear. And if someone says something which is not politically correct, then they think that this person is on the wrong side of the line. And they think this person is not bona fide because he doesn't agree with my particular idea on a certain issue. But Srila Prabhupada did not try to agitate people's minds. He generally, on certain issues, he went along with people and saw it from their perspective in some way. But his main idea was to put into them, inject within them some idea of Krishna consciousness. If you immediately start arguing with someone over some mundane issue, then there's no question of presenting the actual important issue, which is actually Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada adjusted his preaching sometimes in public or to individuals to make it appropriate so that they would actually they get some idea of what Krishna consciousness is. Now, someone who wants to criticize Prabhupada would take that as some kind of fault, that he got something wrong. But as Prabhupada, when he was presented with that argument that maybe you got something wrong, he said, but actually, according to Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is quoted there also, we have to see the Acharya not by by what we consider mundane faults, although that's not disallowed to point out the fault. But the important thing about the Acharya is how he presents Krishna consciousness, how he preaches Krishna consciousness, not some mundane fault that one may find, according to one's own personal point of view. Therefore, the Bhagavatam says, Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavatam, sakshat bhagavat pranitam. The path of religion is directly enunciated by the Lord. Therefore, mental speculation or dry arguments cannot help one lead one to the right path. Nor by independent study of books of knowledge can one progress in spiritual life. One has to approach a bona fide spiritual master to receive this knowledge. So this is from a verse from the Mahabharata. Tarka apratishta shutiya vibhina nesavarishya yasyana binam dharmasya tattvam nihitam guhayam mahajano yena katha sapanta. That tarka apratishta. In the material world, everyone is trying to defeat one another by arguments. That's all right. Chaitanya Charitamrita says that we should not think that arguments are useless because they strengthen the mind if they're correctly done, if they're done amongst persons who are sincerely trying to find out what is the truth. But they're apratishta. Usually there's no end to the argument. Even you say something right, people will deny it. So, apratishta, unsteady. Tarka apratishta shutiya vibhina. There's so many scriptures. There's Puranas for those in the mode of ignorance. There's Puranas for those in the mode of passion. There's Puranas for those in the mode of goodness. And they're appropriate for that particular person or those particular persons in those particular modes. But they may seemingly contradict each other and be confusing if one argues from the Purana in the mode of ignorance to a person who knows the Puranas in the mode of goodness, and vice versa. Nesavri shir yasyana binam, and the sages are many, and they have different points of view. There is Patanjali for yoga, there's Vaishesika for Karmakanda, there's Gautama for nivishesha or impersonalism. There's so many sages, and for their audience, they're Mahajans, they're great personalities, but they disagree with each other. It's not clear what the truth is. Mahajano yena kata tarko pratishta shrutiyana bina nasavri shir yasyana binam dharmasya tattvam nihitam guhayam. Now, hidden in the heart of a self-realized person is the truth. Mahajano yena kata sapanta. And therefore one has to choose who one is going to follow. Everyone is following someone. Yad yad acharya shestas tat tat eve tarojanaha syat pramanam kurute lokas tat anuvartate. Everyone has their Mahajan, the great soul that they're following, that they think has realized the truth that they're looking for. Those in the mode of ignorance, they may choose someone like Hiranyakashipu or Hiranyaksha or Kamsa as their leader. As a matter of fact, there's a Ramayana where the Ravana is the hero. Most of us don't read that Ramayana. And for those in the mode of passion, some industrialist, Bill Gates, someone who makes a lot of money, the Rockefellers, they become Mahajans. And for those in mode of goodness, perhaps some environmentalist, some humanitarian, they become the Mahajan. But these are all on the mundane platform. There's also Mahajans. Naisham matis tavara rikramangrim sprishat inarto bhagavan namavato vihiyasam pararujay vishekam nakinshananam na nivriti tadvat. There's also Mahajans for those who are interested in purely loving Krishna. Those who have given up all material desires and have taken shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna without any reservation. They're Mahajans for those who are transcendentalists. Now, if we don't know who's a Mahajan, we don't know who to follow, then we have to study. We have to observe, we have to investigate. But if we come to the platform that we choose a Mahajan, that this person can lead me to the absolute truth, then we should follow them. If not, then we should keep on looking. But we should follow, eventually we should follow someone. The aim of life is not just keep on looking for your whole life and never do anything. Be on the eternal search. No, we have to choose someone and find out whether it works or not. When someone asked the Prabhupada, can you tell me something about Buddhism? Prabhupada said, do you follow Buddha? He said, no. So Prabhupada said, well, why don't you follow Buddha? Do something. Just don't talk about Buddha. Follow him. Do something for Buddha. When Prabhupada was presenting to the scholars that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prabhupada said, well, here Krishna is declaring himself to be God. He's giving so many arguments why he's God. There's so many persons who are affirming that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what's your objection? Why don't you accept Krishna as God? But they couldn't answer. They're supposed to be scholars, but they can't even give an answer why they object to Krishna being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they won't accept him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's all right, but at least, for instance, we don't blindly accept and we don't blindly reject. But at least give the reasons why you have doubts. Then it can be discussed. But if you can't even give reasons why you're doubting that Krishna is God, then you're simply prejudiced, that's all. Then you simply don't want to end your eternal search for God. Even God comes and presents himself, even he comes before you and lifts Govardhan Hill right before you, still you're going to doubt. Maybe he had some crane that we don't see that lifting the hill. Maybe it actually was Nanda Maharaj lifting the hill. Who knows? So, one has to approach a bona fide spiritual master to receive the knowledge. So we have to find out, is there such a thing as a bona fide spiritual master to receive the knowledge? If we say they're not possible, as Prabhupada was asked, they say no one has ever seen God. So Prabhupada in the morning walk said, that means that they've never met anyone who's seen God. Have you examined every person in the universe and asked them if they've seen God? Or if they know someone who's seen God? So how do they know? They're just speculating. Therefore, even we don't, for instance, at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada mentions that one lady had asked if he knew a translation of the Bhagavad Gita which he could recommend. And Prabhupada said, no, I can't recommend any translation because all of them don't represent the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. The speaker in the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna, and he's saying he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But they don't accept that. Although it's great personalities like the Arjuna or Sankaracharya, Madhvacharya, later Lord Chaitanya, have all declared that Krishna is God. In the Brahma Samhita and other Vedic literature, he's declared as God. Krishna himself declares throughout the Bhagavad Gita that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada said, all right, you may not accept it because you may not accept any of the authorities, you don't accept the scripture, but at least if you're going to read Bhagavad Gita, at least theoretically accept what Krishna says, that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in that submissive spirit, try to read Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, why waste your time reading Bhagavad Gita if you disagree with the speaker? What's your purpose of reading Bhagavad Gita? To misinterpret it, what Krishna says, and declare that Krishna is not God? Is that your idea? To prove that he's not God? So then someone else comes along and proves that what you said was wrong too. And it goes on endlessly, one scholar after another disproving the previous one. Therefore, such a spiritual master should be accepted in full surrender, and one should serve the spiritual master like a menial servant. Now this seems like quite a strange idea. How can you serve someone like a menial servant? Well, go to the university and see what you have to do. If the learned professor says, do this homework, and you say, forget it, I'm not a slave. What will the learned professor do? Say, very nice, I don't want to, maybe nowadays, who knows what they do. But previously, the learned professor would say, well, you don't want to serve, you don't want to pay your fees at the university, you don't want to follow the instructions, then don't be part of the university. So you have to surrender it. If you get a job and your boss asks you to do something, you say, you do it yourself. Then you'll find yourself with another unemployed very quickly. So if spiritual life is based upon developing a service attitude towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his representatives, then if one objects to becoming like a menial servant to Krishna or his representative, then you're in the wrong place. You might as well become a menial servant to someone else, some other occupation. Without false prestige. Satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master is the secret of advancement in spiritual life. So, whether the devotee we're hearing from, whether they're self-realized or not, but if they're acting or trying to act as a transparent vita media to the acharyas and disciple succession, if they're appropriately giving us knowledge or instructions according to what they're authorized to do, then actually what we're serving is not just that devotee, we're serving the entire disciple succession. And if we serve that devotee appropriately, then not only that devotee will be satisfied, but the whole disciple succession will be satisfied, and we make spiritual advancement. if we have an idea that devotees are acting independently always, and that we can't serve their instructions because none of these devotees are actually repeating the message properly in disciple succession, then we have a problem with the philosophy. We think that there's some other devotee, there's some other energy other than either the spiritual energy or the material energy working in this world, and that even though someone may be repeating the message of Krishna as an authority, still we refuse to serve it because we say, well, I don't know if this is actually representative of Krishna. Then who is a representative of Krishna? What is the basis of being a representative? Prabhupada said that a spiritual master, Shiksha or Diksha Guru, it's very simple to be a spiritual master. Just like a peon means a lowly person, not lowly, he doesn't have a high occupation, high status occupation. He delivers a letter to you. The post office worker delivers the letter. Now, you don't object thinking that, my dear post office worker, although I'm expecting 100,000 euros check in the mail, but I've noticed you haven't shaved your head, you haven't shaved your face today, so I refuse to take it. No, he's just simply acting as a messenger. Who can object to the message coming to us, especially if it's so valuable? So in the same way, one should not simply look at the messenger, one should appreciate the message that's being delivered. Inquiries and submission constitute the proper combination for spiritual understanding. Unless there's submission and service, inquiries from the learned spiritual master will not be effective. One has to pass the test of the spiritual master, and when he sees the genuine desire of the disciple, he automatically blesses him with genuine spiritual understanding. So that means the spiritual master may give us instructions and then enlighten us if we actually have a genuine desire to hear from him and to make spiritual advancement. Or even Krishna, the original spiritual master, may give us realizations. In this verse, both blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. One should not only hear submissively, but one should get a clear understanding through submission, service, and inquiries. So it's not that we're simply sitting here trying to hear submissively, but our objective is to understand clearly what Krishna wants us to do so we can do it with full determination and enthusiasm. We should be submissive, but we should also be inquisitive. What am I trying to realize? Namely, becoming a servant of Krishna or something. Therefore, not only we should hear submissively, of course we should do that. What we shouldn't do is follow blindly. Whatever they said, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to do what I think is right. With the idea that whatever the idea may be. Or absurd inquiries. So Prabhupada mentions that religion and philosophy have to go together. If you're just religious and you follow blindly, fanatically, then you won't get the result. And if you're a philosopher and a speculator, and you have millions of questions that don't pertain to the actual subject matter of devotional service or self-realization, then you're simply a dry speculator, and you won't get the results either. On the other hand, if one is submissive, but one also has to be inquisitive to understand things properly, and then be willing to realize the knowledge through service. Not only one should hear submissively from the spiritual master, but one must get a clear understanding in submission, service, and inquiry. A bona fide spiritual master is by nature very kind to the disciple And therefore, when the disciple is always submissive and is ready to render service, then the reciprocation of knowledge and inquiries becomes perfect. So at least we should be submissive, but we should also be inquisitive. We should know what we're being submissive, what's the aim of submission. And then we should do what's necessary to realize our inquisitiveness about Brahma Jignasa, about the absolute truth. That the Hare Krishna movement is meant to satisfy our inquisitiveness to understand the absolute truth. And if we have some other inquisitiveness that we want to find out, there is a Google Guru. Yes, they can satisfy our so many other inquisitiveness that we have. But that's not what this purpose of it. We're not Google Guru. We're restricted to inquiries about the relationship between the soul and the Supreme Soul by the process of pure devotional service. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Hare Krishna. So my experience is that we can believe that speaker is very sincere and have attitude to help us. But when we have a situation that we don't believe fully in message that he says to us personally, we have doubts in mind, what we should do in that case? Because mind very often says, that person don't me very well, or he's not completely qualified about this particular point, and so on. So what to do with this doubt, actually?
Find someone that you believe in to give you instructions. And read Bhagavad Gita, read the scriptures to find out what Krishna wants you to do. If we doubt, we must believe something that Krishna says. And if we find something that Krishna says and then follow it, then see what the result is. It's never expected that everyone's going to believe everything. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a process of devotional service. But at least we have to believe something and then put it into practice. Otherwise, there's no question of realizing anything. So faith has to be there, some degree of faith.
Like we should make experiment, although we don't believe fully it would works, we should try to follow and see results, something like that.
Yeah, we shouldn't blindly accept, and we should not blindly reject either. Submissiveness also means that at least one puts aside one's doubts, puts aside one's fanatical tendency, and tries it out with intelligence, sincerely, tries to practice what's said and then see what the result is.
Thank you, and maybe one more thing. Prabhupada usually said for new people who research about absolute truth, they need sincerity to really find absolute truth. But my question is, what would be really definition of sincerity? Because all people think I'm right, I'm good, I'm sincere.
Well, sincerity means that someone says, give me a glass of water, and you agree to get him a glass of water instead of bringing back a chocolate milkshake. Means that you're agreeing to follow the instruction. That's a symptom of being sincere. Anything else? Yes. Okay.
Why are there tense relationships between devotees? Maybe that's connected to the lecture. Maybe because we don't follow Shastras. That's what I heard in this lecture.
Well, we do to some degree follow Shastra, or else we wouldn't be here. Because Shastra said that we should come to the class. So we are following Shastra. But we haven't realized enough to understand clearly what our relationship with different devotees are and how to serve them appropriately. Therefore, although in relations with devotees there should be loving exchanges, but sometimes we misunderstand on what level a devotee is on, and we don't serve them appropriately to invoke a proper response from them. Anything else? Yes.
Hare Krishna, Gurudev. So you were saying that the stage of fearlessness is when there's no more doubts about our identity, relationship with Krishna. So you're saying that fearlessness is equated with the stage of bhava?
Complete fearlessness, yes. When one is convinced that one is going back to the spiritual world by realization, has realized that he's going back to the spiritual world, then there's no more doubts. But even at the stage of liberation, nishta, when one realizes one is eternal, then one is not doubtful anymore about one's, at least, existence eternally. And therefore one becomes at least prasannatma, not necessarily ecstatic all the time, but at least joyful. So the different types of levels of freedom from doubt. All right. Wala. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanande.